I still remember the smell of disinfectant that morning, the sterile chill of the hospital room mixing with the faint sound of machines beeping somewhere down the hall. My fingers were cold against the blanket, my chest tight from the surgery, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I was waiting for the doctor to come in and tell me that everything went well. My son Daniel stood by the window with his fiancée Emily. They were whispering softly, but not the kind of whisper that comforts. It was the kind that hides. Every now and then, Daniel would glance my way and force a smile, but something about it didn't reach his eyes. I told myself it was just exhaustion, that maybe I was imagining things. But deep down, something felt off. When the doctor finally walked in, his voice was calm, too calm. He checked my chart, asked how I felt, and smiled politely. Then, as he leaned down to adjust my IV, he slipped a small folded piece of paper into my palm so discreetly that Daniel and Emily didn't notice. I blinked, confused. For a second, I thought maybe I imagined it. But when they stepped out to take a call, I opened my hand, and there it was. A white note crumpled at the edges with shaky handwriting that simply said, "Don't trust them." I stared at those words until they blurred. Don't trust them. My first thought was that it must be a mistake, that maybe it wasn't meant for me. But the doctor's eyes had met mine with something like warning. Who was them? Daniel? Emily? My heart started to race so fast the monitor beeped in panic. I pressed the call button, pretending to need help, but when the nurse arrived, it wasn't the same one who'd been there before. She smiled too brightly, like someone covering fear. I asked where the doctor had gone. She said he was busy with another patient. Busy? After writing something like that? That night I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavy and every sound made me jump. I turned the note over and on the back was a phone number, half smudged, written hastily. I didn't recognize it. I slipped the paper under my pillow before Daniel returned. When he came back into the room, he was holding my purse, something I never gave him permission to take. Just sorting your things, Mom, he said casually, but his tone made me uneasy. I noticed Emily standing behind him, arms folded, her gaze cold and distant. It wasn't the first time she'd looked at me that way, but for the first time I felt it like a knife. The next morning, Daniel handed me a clipboard with several sheets of paper. It's just insurance stuff, he said. You need to sign them before discharge. His words were smooth, practiced. Just insurance paperwork, he repeated when I hesitated. My hands trembled as I signed, though something in me screamed not to. When he took the forms, I caught the faintest smirk on Emily's lips. It was gone as quickly as it came, but it left me frozen. Later, when the nurse came in to change my IV, she avoided eye contact. I asked about the doctor again, and she lowered her voice. He's on leave, ma'am. Leave? The man who operated on me less than 24 hours ago had vanished? My throat went dry. I clutched the note tighter under the blanket, every word of it pulsing in my mind. Don't trust them. That evening, as Daniel stepped out to take another call, Emily sat beside my bed and said softly, "You really shouldn't worry yourself. Daniel's handling everything." Her hand rested lightly on mine, but it felt cold, calculated. "You just need to rest. He's doing what's best for you." She smiled again, perfect, rehearsed, hollow. When Daniel came back, he changed the subject instantly, talking about how lucky I was, how everything went smoothly. But as I watched them whisper near the doorway, the truth began to sink in like ice. They weren't nervous about me. They were nervous about what I might find out. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the hospital lights flickering through the blinds. Every promise Daniel had made echoed in my head. "I'll take care of you, Mom. You just need to sign these forms. Trust me." He promised me it was for my safety. He promised me I was fine. But I didn't know then that those signatures had nothing to do with my health. And everything to do with my future. Because the number written on the back of that note, the one I almost threw away, would soon lead me to a truth so dark, it almost killed me before the illness ever could. When I close my eyes, I can still see Daniel as a little boy, running barefoot through the hallway, laughing, calling out, "Mom, look at me." I raised him alone after his father died. Back then, I thought the world had ended, but Daniel gave me a reason to keep breathing. I worked days at the school cafeteria and nights at a local diner, just to keep food on the table and dreams in his heart. I sold my wedding jewelry to pay for his college application fees. When he got accepted, I cried so hard I couldn't even see his face through the tears. I thought every sacrifice meant something, that love was being built brick by brick through every sleepless night, Every promise, I love you, Mom. But what happens when those bricks become walls? When love turns into control disguised as protection? It started slowly. After my surgery, Daniel insisted on handling everything. My medications, my mail, even my bank cards. You shouldn't worry about these things, he said softly, like I was a fragile child instead of the woman who'd carried him through hell. Emily would nod in agreement, her voice dripping with concern. You need rest, not responsibilities. And I wanted to believe them. I did believe them, for a while. Because isn't that what every mother dreams of? A son who takes care of her in her old age? But soon the care felt heavy. My phone would go missing for hours. My mail started arriving already opened. I noticed Emily keeping my purse on the kitchen counter, so I wouldn't forget it. Though somehow it was always lighter when I picked it up. And when I asked Daniel about my bank account, why the balance had dropped overnight, he smiled that same rehearsed smile and said, I paid a few bills, Mom. It's for your protection. Protection. That word began to sound poisonous. I tried not to question him. I told myself he was just stressed. But little cracks started showing. When I wanted to visit my old friend Linda, he told me the car wasn't safe enough. When I mentioned going through the mail myself, Emily quickly said, Oh, don't worry. I already filed it for you. Filed it where? Every small decision I made was gently redirected, until I realized I hadn't made a real decision in months. One afternoon, I overheard them in the kitchen. I was halfway down the hall pretending to nap when I heard Daniel say, We just need to make it official. Emily's voice dropped low. Are you sure she won't notice? She trusts me, he said flatly. She always does. My breath caught. Official what? I wanted to storm in and demand answers, but fear rooted me in place. Because if what I was beginning to suspect was true, then I wasn't living with my caretakers. I was living with my captors. That night, I pretended to sleep again. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard from Daniel's office, the murmur of Emily's voice nearby. I waited until the lights dimmed and crept down the hall. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like thunder inside my chest. Their office door was ajar. Papers everywhere. I saw my name on an envelope addressed to a law firm, but the spelling was wrong. Marilyn instead of Marilyn. My fingers shook as I pulled the letter out. Inside was a power of attorney document. My signature, my handwriting, but I didn't remember signing it. I froze. My knees buckled, and I had to sit on the edge of the couch. Every part of me wanted to scream, but I just stared at the ink, tracing the letters of my name like they belonged to a stranger. Daniel had always been my reason to live. And now, somehow, I was becoming his property. When I confronted him the next morning, he didn't even flinch. You must have forgotten, Mom, he said calmly. It's just to make sure you're taken care of if something happens. But you already manage my accounts, I whispered. He smiled. Exactly. This just makes it easier? The word echoed like a curse. That evening, I asked Emily where my doctor's notes were, the ones about my medications. She laughed lightly. Oh, Daniel has them. Don't worry, you're in good hands. Then she added, almost playfully, You know, stress can make memory fuzzy at your age. Maybe you did sign it and just forgot. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes, cold, calculating, told another story. What would you do if someone you loved was controlling your life behind your back? If the hands you once trusted to protect you began tightening around your freedom? The days blurred together after that. My room felt smaller, my home quieter. Daniel insisted I hand over my keys, for safety reasons. I noticed he had changed the locks a week later. Emily took my phone to update it, and when she returned it, half my contacts were missing. My friend Linda never called again. I would find out later that Daniel had blocked her number. Then came the bills. I hadn't ordered anything, hadn't spent a dime, yet transactions kept appearing on my account. When I asked Daniel, he said it was for maintenance on the house. But there was no maintenance. No workers, no repairs, nothing. One afternoon, when he left for errands, I opened his drawer. Inside, I found copies of documents, insurance forms, medical letters, and at the bottom, another power of attorney draft with a different date. My blood ran cold. He wasn't taking care of me. He was erasing me. That night, I sat in my bed, staring at the framed photo of us, Daniel at graduation, me beside him with tears of pride. I whispered, Why? over and over, as if the picture might answer. The next morning, Emily came into my room holding coffee, smiling just a bit too wide. "You'll feel better once everything's settled," she said softly. I looked up and asked, "Settled how?" Her smile never wavered. "You'll see soon." That was the first time I felt real fear. Not the kind that fades with morning light, but the kind that stays in your bones. I began searching the house quietly, in the moments they were out. Every drawer, every envelope, every cabinet. And then, one afternoon, tucked between two folders in Daniel's desk, I found it, a single folded receipt. My heart pounded as I read the words printed across the top. Property listing, 123 West Cedar Lane, my address, my home listed for sale, and the name written under seller, Marilyn Carter, my name, my signature, my betrayal. That was the moment I stopped being a mother in denial. That was the moment I realized my own son wasn't protecting me. He was disposing of me. And as I held that paper in my trembling hands, one thought echoed louder than the sound of my heartbeat. If my home is already for sale, what happens to me when it's gone? The morning after I found the house listing, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my reflection in a cold cup of coffee. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Daniel and Emily were in the garden laughing, their voices drifting through the window like ghosts of a life I no longer recognized. I felt trapped inside my own home, surrounded by people who smiled like family but planned like thieves. Something inside me snapped that morning. I decided that if they could play games behind my back, so could I. On the fridge, under a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was a note from my doctor. Just a routine reminder, or so I thought. But at the bottom, there was a phone number scribbled in blue ink I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened. That handwriting, it wasn't my doctor's. It looked like Emily's. For days, I'd seen her handling my papers, my prescriptions, even my hospital files. That number could be my only way to find out what they were really doing. So when Daniel left to meet the realtor and Emily said she was going to the store, I locked my door, drew the curtains, and dialed the number. The phone rang twice before a woman answered, her voice trembling. "Dr. Whitaker's office," I swallowed hard. "Yes, this is Mrs. Clark. I think there's been a mix-up with my forms." There was silence. Then softly the woman said, "Mrs. Clark, I'm not supposed to talk to you directly." "Why not?" I whispered. Her voice dropped lower. "Those forms," she hesitated, "they weren't for your surgery." My stomach turned cold. "What do you mean?" "They were for your estate." Before I could ask anything else, the line went dead. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, the silence roaring around me. Estate. The word echoed through my mind like a verdict. Not my health, my estate. That meant property, assets, everything. I felt dizzy, gripping the counter for balance. My son, the boy I'd raised with my own hands, had filed legal documents about what would happen to my belongings if I became medically incapable. But I wasn't incapable, not yet. When Daniel came home that evening, I tried to act normal, though my heart felt like it was caught in a fist. He set his phone on the table, smiling the same way he always did. Calm, practiced. I watched him pour a glass of water, humming to himself, and something about his ease made me sick. I asked gently at first, "Daniel, what are these medical papers you've been handling?" He looked up without missing a beat. "Just standard forms, Mom, don't worry." "Then why do they mention my estate?" I asked, voice shaking. He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Mom, it's just paperwork." "You're overreacting again." That word again. Overreacting. He'd used it before, like a leash tightening around my thoughts. But this time I didn't let it silence me. I stood, pushing back the chair. I spoke to someone from the doctor's office. She said, Daniel cut me off, voice sharp for the first time. "You what?" "I called the number on the note," I said. He went pale, then quickly recovered with a smile. "That was just a billing error. You shouldn't be snooping into things you don't understand." Snooping. He made it sound childish, as if I were the one betraying him. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound made my heart jump. The creak of the floorboards, the wind against the window. Around midnight, I crept into the bathroom, turned on the faucet to cover the noise, and opened my pill bottle. I'd been taking them faithfully for weeks, believing they were for my blood pressure. But now I wasn't sure. So I started hiding them one by one under the mattress. Every time Emily watched me take them, I'd press one to my tongue and pretend to swallow. I didn't know what they were trying to do, but my instincts screamed, "They need you sick." The next morning, Emily was in the kitchen, her voice syrupy sweet. "We're going away for the weekend," she said. I blinked. "We?" "Daniel and I, just a short getaway." "What about me?" I asked quietly. Her lips curved into a polite smile. "You'll be fine here. You need rest." Something about the way she said rest chilled me. Like it wasn't a suggestion, it was an instruction. After they left, I wandered the house, searching for anything that could make sense of what was happening. I opened drawers, checked behind photo frames, even peeled the edge of a wallpaper where I'd once hidden spare cash. Nothing. Until I found a stack of mail stuffed inside the bottom of Daniel's filing cabinet. Among the papers was a medical bill from the hospital, a procedure I'd never had. A transfer of funds for long-term care services. My vision blurred. They were preparing me for something. Not death, not yet, but something close. Something where I'd be present but powerless. What would you do if your own child started planning your disappearance while still smiling across the dinner table? That night, I sat in the dark, waiting for them to return from their trip. When the headlights finally cut through the window, I saw Daniel helping Emily out of the car, her laughter echoing like a stranger's. They looked happy, too happy. My fear had become their comfort. Over the next few days, I started pretending to forget things, small details, harmless mistakes. I wanted them to believe their plan was working. I let Daniel think I couldn't remember where I kept my glasses, or that I'd missed a doctor's appointment. Every time he patted my shoulder and said, "See, this is why I'm here," I smiled back, quietly memorizing everything he said. Then one afternoon, while he was out, I went through his desk again. The first drawer was full of receipts and junk mail. The second, neatly organized with labeled folders. But the third, hidden beneath a false panel, contained something that made my breath stop. A stack of letters. My husband's old letters. At first, I thought they were originals, the ones he used to write me before he died. But when I opened one, the words felt wrong. Familiar, but wrong. "I trust Daniel to take care of everything," it said, signed in my late husband's name. Only my husband had never written that. I knew every curve of his handwriting, every habit of his speech. This letter was different. The lines straighter. The ink newer. The signature, off by just enough to make my stomach twist. I compared it with an old letter I'd saved in my jewelry box. There was no doubt. The letter in the drawer wasn't written by my husband. It was written by Daniel. My son, my knees gave out. I sat on the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. He'd forged his dead father's words, turned the memory of the man I loved into a weapon. When he came home that evening, I couldn't even look at him. He kissed my forehead and said softly, "You look tired." I wanted to scream, to tell him I knew, but I stayed silent. Because for the first time, I understood what I was up against. Daniel wasn't just lying, he was rewriting history. I spent that night sitting on the edge of my bed, the forged letter beside me, the truth finally crashing over me like a wave I couldn't stop. My son wasn't protecting me, and he wasn't doing this alone. Emily's hands were on everything, my pills, my mail, my mind. But as I stared at the forged letter under the lamp, I noticed something else. A faint indentation beneath the paper, as if someone had written another message on top of it. I tilted it toward the light and my blood ran cold. There, faintly pressed into the surface, were 6 chilling words in Daniel's handwriting. "She'll never know until it's done." And in that moment, I realized the truth wasn't just buried in paperwork, it was buried in me. Because whatever Daniel was planning next, it wasn't about money anymore. It was about control, and something deep in my gut told me the worst was still coming. The night before I decided to act, I sat alone in my living room with every light turned off. The house that once felt like safety now pulsed with quiet danger. Every photo on the walls, Daniel's graduation, his wedding announcement, felt like proof of my own blindness. He promised me he'd protect me, I whispered to myself. He promised me, but promises mean nothing when the person who made them has already decided you're disposable. That night, I made my own promise, this time to myself. I would take everything they built on lies, and I would burn it down to truth. The next morning, I dialed the number the doctor had secretly given me at the hospital, the same doctor who had slipped me the note. "Don't trust them." His voice was cautious but kind. He said, "There's someone who can help you. A lawyer who's dealt with..." situations like this before. He gave me her name, Marilyn Holt. When I met her, she looked nothing like the lawyers on TV. No arrogance, no polished smile. Just calm eyes and a voice that didn't waste time. When the footage leaked, I didn't even know at first. I woke up to missed calls, messages, and a knock on my door from a journalist. The video of Daniel's confession, the dinner, the lies, the pen camera, had spread like wildfire. People were calling it the betrayal dinner. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small or helpless. The world finally saw what I had been living through. My son's perfect mask had shattered before millions of strangers. But as the headlines grew, so did the noise. Daniel's lawyer called it an act of emotional breakdown. They said I had manipulated him with guilt. Emily claimed she was just following instructions. It was almost laughable, almost. Because I knew the truth was coming, and this time I had nothing left to lose. When I walked into that courtroom, my hands shook, but not from fear. From release. Rows of cameras lined the walls, and every eye turned toward me. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, pale, hollow, pretending to be remorseful. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but Daniel wouldn't look up. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I took a deep breath and stood. He promised me it was for my safety, I said softly. And in that stillness, the whole room seemed to exhale. But what happened next left me breathless. The judge pressed play on the recording. My voice came through the speakers, fragile, hesitant. Then Daniel's words followed, cold and deliberate. "She'll be gone soon anyway." A gasp spread through the courtroom like a ripple of thunder. I looked at my son, his face drained of all color, his lips trembling. That was the moment the performance ended. He couldn't hide behind charm or excuses anymore. Emily tried to stand, muttering something about needing air, but the bailiff stopped her. Her hand clutched her purse like it held the last piece of her freedom. "Sit down, Ms. Graves," the judge ordered. She obeyed, but her eyes darted toward Daniel, searching for help that never came. Then the doctor was called. He looked nervous but resolute. "I couldn't stay silent," he said, voice cracking slightly. "Those forms weren't medical. They were legal transfers of her estate. Mr. Clark asked me to disguise them." The judge nodded slowly, pen tapping against the desk. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. "Save it," he said firmly. "I've heard enough." But the worst blow came next. My lawyer handed the judge a second document, a letter supposedly from my late husband. Only this one had Daniel's handwriting beneath the signature. The judge's voice was steady. "So you forged your father's will to gain control over your mother's inheritance?" Daniel didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, jaw clenched, eyes glistening. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the recording system. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. Because no matter how much I'd once loved him, what he did was unforgivable. What kind of son plots his mother's downfall while calling it care? What kind of heart sees love as leverage? Then Daniel spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, please." I didn't mean for it to go this far. I met his eyes for the first time in weeks. "You meant every word," I said. "And you made it easy for yourself." The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Clark, you not only exploited your mother's illness, but you forged financial documents and attempted to defraud her estate. The evidence is overwhelming." His gavel hit the desk once. Sharp. Final. "I find the defendant guilty." The sound echoed in my chest like thunder rolling through hollow walls. Emily broke down crying, begging for leniency. Daniel didn't move. He looked frozen, lost, as if reality had finally caught up to his arrogance. When the hearing ended, journalists swarmed outside. The footage had already gone viral again. Clips of my trembling voice, the courtroom reaction, Daniel's confession. People online called me the mother who fought back. Some said I was brave. But bravery wasn't what kept me alive, it was the truth. The truth that doesn't destroy families. Secrets do. As the bailiffs led Daniel away, he looked back once, eyes full of something between regret and resentment. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. I simply turned to leave, clutching the small cross pendant my husband had given me years ago. For the first time, it didn't feel like a burden to carry. But just as I stepped outside, a reporter shouted, "Mrs. Clark, how does it feel to finally be free?" I stopped, looked at the sky, and whispered to myself, "Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just silence after years of noise." And in that silence, after the verdict was read, After the cameras flashed, after the masks fell, I realized something. I hadn't just survived their betrayal. I had outlived it. After the sentencing, the house felt impossibly quiet. The air that once carried Daniel's laughter and Emily's soft, deceitful tone was now heavy with silence. Their photos were gone, their rooms empty, and yet echoes of them lingered in every corner. I'd walk past Daniel's door and still half expect to hear his voice, the one that used to call me Mom before it turned cold and transactional. But that voice will never live here again. They both disappeared after the verdict. No calls, no apologies, just absence. And in that absence, I found something I'd been craving for years: peace. I sold the house a month later. It wasn't hard. Every wall held a memory I didn't want to relive. When the movers packed the last box, I stood in the living room, ran my hand along the window frame, and whispered, "You can rest now." I didn't mean the house. I meant myself. The money from the sale didn't tempt me. I had seen what greed could do, how it corrodes love, how it rots family from the inside. So I donated half to the hospital that once saved me, not just from sickness, but from losing my sanity. The first time I went back there, the nurse who had warned me all those months ago hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. The doctor joined us later in the courtyard. We didn't talk much. We didn't have to. We just sat under the shade of the old oak tree, sipping tea in silence. Sometimes silence says what words cannot. He smiled gently and said, "You're stronger than most, Mrs. Clark." I smiled back. "No," I told him. "I just stopped letting the wrong people define what strong means." But the strangest thing happened after that. I started receiving letters. At first, just a few, from women who said my story gave them courage. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Stories from mothers, grandmothers, widows, people who'd been financially manipulated, emotionally cornered, or silenced by their own families. Each letter began the same way. I thought I was alone. I read every one of them. Some broke me. Some healed me. And one night, after reading a letter from a 72-year-old woman who'd been tricked by her own grandson, I knew what I needed to do next. I started a foundation, small at first. Just a desk, a phone, and a few volunteers. But soon it grew into something real. A lifeline for elderly people who'd been deceived by the people they trusted most. We offered legal advice, emotional support, even safe housing. Every morning I'd come in early, make tea, and sit by the window to read new letters. Their words reminded me why I survived, that my story wasn't just pain. It was purpose. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven Daniel. It's a question that still stops me. Would you forgive your family if they betrayed you like this? I used to think forgiveness meant letting them back into your heart. But now I know forgiveness is just releasing the weight they left behind. So yes, maybe I've forgiven him, not for his sake, but for mine, because I deserve to live without bitterness poisoning what's left of my life. There are days when I walk past the hospital again, the same window where I first saw the doctor's note fluttering against the glass. I pause, touch the cold pane, and whisper, "Thank you for that note." It was such a small act, a slip of paper, but it saved everything. It reminded me that even in betrayal, there are still people who choose to do the right thing. And that kindness, quiet and unannounced, can change a life. I don't hear from Daniel or Emily anymore. Sometimes I wonder where they are. But then I remind myself, it doesn't matter. Their silence is their sentence. My peace is my freedom. And every time I help someone escape the trap I once lived in, I reclaim another piece of the life they tried to steal. Now, when I look at my reflection, I don't see the frightened woman who doubted her own sanity. I see someone reborn. Someone who walked through fire and didn't just survive. She built something from the ashes. I see a woman who finally understands that freedom has no heir, no price, and no bloodline. It isn't given. It's taken back, and that's when I learned the truth. Freedom is the greatest inheritance.